Alright, so warm-up's finished. I like to do videos like this because today's like a really frustrating day. It's threshold, but I can't push as hard as I'd like to push. Today's a day where I have to keep the heart rate under 160. If I don't keep the heart rate under 160, the lactate goes up. If I keep the heart rate under 160, I keep the lactate down, and it's a good day. It's frustrating because sorry. It's frustrating because I can do the exact same session with the exact same recovery and run at 175 or 180 heart rate. So it's a really frustrating day because you can push harder, but you have to be disciplined and choose not to push harder. That's the idea of this session. So I'm going to finish my warm-up, some drills, some sort of dynamic stretching, some strides, and then we'll get stuck into the 6x2K, and hopefully it goes well. Hopefully I'm disciplined. We'll get to check that lactate and find out, and then I'll talk you through, while I do the session, I'll talk you through the different types of threshold, why today is really important, why not many people get today right, and how it might help your running.
Okay, so let's keep this to the point. I hope you enjoyed the intro. Today is threshold. Let's start with the very basics. Two types of threshold that I'm going to talk about. Today is aerobic threshold. The other type of threshold is anaerobic threshold. For today's purposes, we're focusing on aerobic threshold, and that's the point where the effort level and the lactate move from baseline. You can see on the graph, it shows you it's the point where you've gone from a stable lactate or stable effort to things are starting to creep up a tiny bit. It's minimal. Why people get aerobic threshold wrong is because it's actually quite easy, which is why it's frustrating. Anaerobic threshold is that next level, and that's that next inflation point where the lactate is almost starting to move towards places where you're gonna get tired quickly. That's that 3 to 4 word answer area, whereas aerobic threshold is quite a bit below that and quite a bit easier. But like I said, it's going to help flatten the curve to give you that foundation to then push the fitness to the right. Today's session broken down, 4K easy warm up, nothing more, no less, just an easy pace, get the body and muscles warmed up. Come back, do the drills, do the stretching, do some strides, and then crack on with the aerobic threshold. 6x2K with roughly 40 seconds to 75 seconds rest. It really depends on if I'm checking a lactate or not. If I'm checking a lactate, of course it takes a bit longer. I averaged 6:40. The paces were a little bit up and down because of terrain and wind, and one direction the wind was pretty strong in your face, and then obviously when you flipped it, you had it behind you. You don't worry about that. How you execute a session like today perfectly, well, that's what we're going to talk about next. So now you know what today was, what the differences are with the two thresholds. Let's talk about executing a threshold day correctly. All right, so when it comes to execution, that's likely what separates a really good training day from a okay training day. That's hypothetically what separates your potential from getting to a great place from a okay place. When you go to the track or the road or the grass fields and you're gonna do maybe a session like I did today, how you execute that session, what effort you put in, that's what gets you the most benefits. That's what helps you absorb more of the training and get better, get faster, race better. If you're constantly undercooking it and not working hard enough, or perhaps you're one of those people that constantly overdoes it a little bit, well, maybe the results won't be as consistent as you want them to be. That's why I built the whole running masterclass, because it was built around what makes professionals good at what they do is in the little details of how it's done. When it comes to things like threshold, that means taking the first rep or two that little bit easier. That gives the heart rate time to get up to the right effort. The next part of that is no agenda. Don't have an agenda. Don't show up, I'm going to average this pace. Don't show up thinking you're going to knock it out of the park. Get rid of agenda completely. When it comes to a threshold type day, the only goal is to execute the session at the correct threshold, at the correct heart rate, at the correct intensity. You can see more on zones in my other video on zones, but today's all about execution and threshold. So what I'm doing today is I'm setting off at an effort that I know for a fact. I'm not looking at heart rate, I'm not looking at pace, I'm just running. But I'm making sure that I know for an absolute fact that that effort is below the intended effort for today. If you go off in that feeling optimistic kind of effort, you'll probably get it wrong. You want to give your body a chance to get warmed up. You want to give your aerobic system a chance, your heart rate, your lactate, your energy resources. You want to give them a chance to get to that right effort. If you go guns blazing and you're not fully warmed up and you haven't even done one rep, you'll end up spiking the lactate, spiking the effort, and all of a sudden the rest of the session might fall apart. So keep that first part of the session that little bit easier. Be really safe and then grow into the session. Don't make a mess of it in the first rep. That's the disciplined part. You must be disciplined. And you must be disciplined too, in that if when you get going and you start to work into the session, you notice you're a bit tired, or it's windy, or the ground underfoot isn't fast. We're coming back to agenda. You have to chill out. You have to be disciplined. There was an effort that you intended to run at today, and you must run at that effort. On days like today, that aerobic threshold day, it pisses you off. The wind blows, the ground's rough underfoot, the heart rate creeps, so does the lactate. So you must back off, swallow the pride, drop the ego, run at the right effort. That's where you get all the best bang for your buck. We've talked about discipline, we've talked about no agenda. You must be patient. Patient is that final step. Show patience in that the speed will get to where it's going to get to. As runners, we're always trying to force things. You're trying to force that fitness forward. You're trying to force that speed forward. If you're constantly trying to force the speed to the speed you want it to be, well, then you're not being patient. What more can you possibly do but go to the track, go to the road, go to the grass fields, run at the right effort, execute the session in a brilliant way, and hope that next time or the time after that, you're a bit faster. That's all we can do. That's the part that you can control. If you're one of those people that's constantly pushing and trying to force that speed, I bet any money the consistency of your race results is all over the place. No agenda, bring back discipline, and be patient. Today is a day that you're not pushing. Today's a day that you don't get to go guns blazing, but it is a day that helps flatten that fitness curve and starts to move things forward. The final thing I'm going to cover is how could you implement some of this into your own training. What you could do is start with 8 times 3 minutes with 30 seconds rest, a minute rest, walking or jogging, and do that just below that kind of marathon-y type effort. So a little bit above your steady pace if you watch my video on steady, but a little bit below that marathon effort. Start with the 8 times 3 minutes, and then you can progress it perhaps to similar sort of length, that 24 to 30 minutes, and maybe you'll move to 4-minute reps, 5-minute reps, and as you increase the rep length, you can push the recovery out a little bit. But because the effort level is quite low, you don't have to go crazy with recovery. More recovery means faster rep. But we're not looking to run super quick today. We're just looking to help develop that lowest part of the curve, that point right before you start to move into harder effort. Be patient with it. I cannot stress that enough. Be disciplined and don't have an agenda. This is where people get it wrong. People hate this kind of training. Runners hate this kind of training because it's too easy. It's too slow. Words like pathetic, you suck, you're no good. once you start to keep a limiter on that heart rate, you're gonna get really frustrated. Because you could run at a heart rate 10 beats higher. You might be able to run at a heart rate 15 beats higher, but don't worry about it. Show some patience, show some bloody discipline, and throw your fucking agenda out the window and just stick to the task. Execute the session really well, and over a 3 to 4 month period, watch that speed gradually get better. Now let's go back to the training session. I have a little bit of a review, I guess you could say, at the end of it, but I hope you enjoyed this. I hope the advice was useful, and that's my take on today's aerobic threshold.
Okay, so that's job done. It's a easy session to do in terms of intensity, but it's a really annoying, really frustrating, really hard session to do because it just pisses me off. That's why most people won't do it right, because you have to keep the heart rate or the intensity right at that point of steady state just before your lactate would start to creep. So that almost means at the end of your warm-up, your lactate almost doesn't move up much even when you start your reps. So why it gets frustrating is because you know you can work harder, and so if the wind blows a little bit, or it's altitude, or as you've seen when I get on the dirt path and it's ruddy and it's soft underfoot, you get frustrated because you want to push harder. You can push harder, but just remember those basics. Don't have an agenda, keep your discipline, be patient, and know that the goal of that session, that aerobic threshold, steady state, is to keep that lactate under control. I could run at 162, 164 heart rate, and the lactate would only go to 2.1, 2.2, but that's not the same as 1.6 or 1.8. That's it starting to creep. You want to avoid that little creep. You're running at that fastest pace possible before the lactate starts to increase. It's so annoying. Words like, this is pathetic, this sucks, that's what starts to go through my head. But if you can get that pace faster, you're flattening that curve before the lactate starts to creep. My arm's gone dead holding the camera. Today was good. If you enjoyed that video, do me some favors, comment, like, subscribe, do all those lovely things. Check out joggingroom.com. Heaps of advice, heaps of tips, free stuff. There is a masterclass, there is training plans. Check that out and take care.